Hello and welcome to this first walkthrough of Silver Bullet, a project I've been working on for some time. For the purposes of this demo, I created an empty space, which is like nothing more than an empty directory, in which we're going to launch npx, the npx command that is listed on the GitHub page. So npx silver bullet md server on dot, which is the current directory, which will, if you already have the silver bullet installed, it will simply run it. If you don't have it installed, it will download it. If you have an outdated version locally, it will offer you to update it. So using this command, you can simply just run silver bullet, whether you have it installed or not, right? So let's do that right now. I do, of course, have it installed, so I don't need to download it. And it gives me a URL where it's running. By default, it's on port 3000. Here we go. So this is what Silver Bullet looks like when you open it in the browser. But it's also a PWA. You can install it as a PWA, like if you have a Chromium-based browser, and add it to your dock, desktop, give it a proper frame, without the location bar. That's actually how I use it day to day. Just for the purposes of this demo, I'm just opening it in a browser. So what does the UI of Silver Bullet look like? At the top, you have your kind of like name of the page. If you click it, you open the kind of page switcher, so you can switch between different pages. There's a run command button over here, which shows you the command palette, all the commands, and we'll look at some of them you can run. At the center, of course, is the editor, which we'll get to, and at the bottom is kind of a status bar, like how many words have you written in this page and things like that. As I said, in the center, you have a very powerful, I would say, Markdown editor. So all the content you write in Silver Bullet is in Markdown. Hello, this is a test I'm writing in Markdown. You can select stuff here. You can use shortcuts like Command B to mark something as bold, Command I to mark it as italics. You can add headers. This is a header, and it will immediately kind of like visually mark it up as looking like a header. So you kind of like can easily read the text, and it kind of looks nice. If you link to things like this is my blog. Also, when you actually click that, it becomes a clickable link. So you just go there directly. And there's some extra convenient, text editing commands like this is my item, this is item 2, item 3. You can select those, run the command palette, and then say, okay, listify this whole selection, either with numbers or without. So let's do it with numbers, and it will automatically kind of like prefix each of those with a number, and then if you want to move to the fourth one, you just hit enter, and this is item number 4. So overall, this is just a nice, nice to use, reasonably looking, Markdown editor at its core. But of course, there's more to this, right? So one thing you can do, and this is where we kind of go into more of the extensions, is that, okay, I can now link to other pages. We're now at the index page, but let's say I want to link to another page. And for that, we use the double bracket syntax, which is very common now. If you link to a page that doesn't exist, clicking it will create it. This is a new page. As you'll see, the URL has been updated. We're in a browser environment, so if you want to move back, we can just go back and to the index page and so on. Linking back to the index, but we can also just click on that or do Command Enter or Control Enter, depending on your operating system. Now, Silver Bullet is relatively smart, like it indexes the content. It understands quite a fair amount of what you're trying to do. So let's say that if you want to give this page another name, so another page we're going to want to rename, and we're going to rename it to, let's say, the other page. Excellent choice. You will see that if you go back to pages that linked to it, those links have been updated, right? It now says to the other page instead of another page. Okay. Let's get to the more interesting stuff. Let's say that I want to use my space to keep track of books that I read and like interesting observations that I kind of get from them. So my books, I'm going to create some new pages for each of my books. I kind of came to the convention of using emoji in my note names or page names. So in this particular case, I'm going to use the closed book emoji for, let's say, Harry Potter. As you notice, there's this emoji functionality here where you type a colon and then start typing the name of one. It will just replace that with the actual emoji, which is kind of convenient. That's another link to another book, and I think 2 books will suffice for now. Okay, just creating a link doesn't create the page. You actually have to go there to create the actual content. Say this is a super nice book, and let's do something in the foundation one as well. This is also cool, and there is an Apple TV Plus adaptation. Okay, so how do I now navigate between different pages? Well, you can use this command K, a page switcher. And you can just say, okay, go to foundation. You can type part of the title. You can go there. You can also create a new page and say a completely new page which doesn't exist. And the moment you hit enter, you will actually create it. This is completely new. But let's go back to the index. So you can kind of cross-link your pages and navigate using Command K. What you can also do, and that's what I wanted to get to, is kind of use queries to build up parts of your pages. So in Silver Bullet, you also have things like slash commands, and there's a bunch of basic slash commands, for instance, today to insert the current day, or tomorrow to insert tomorrow's date. There's also one called query, and that's the one I want to use here. That is kind of give you the facilities to use queries in your pages. So what does that mean? Basically, it puts in these kind of like HTML-like markers, like hash query and slash query at the end. What it's going to do in a bit is kind of like in the body here, put the result of a particular query. So what is one query we can write is the query is page, which basically would list you all the pages. Just typing this doesn't update the page yet. You have to actually say, materialize queries update or Alt Q, and I'll be using Alt Q along the way because it's much faster. And then it will fill up the body with the results of that query. So by default as a markdown table. So here we go. We have a list of all the pages as well as their last modified date and permissions. If you say, well, actually, I'm only interested in the name, you can say select name, right? And that way you can limit kind of what it's going to show. And you can do order by last modified descending, and then it will, you don't see it here, but it will order it in descending order. So you can do that type of stuff. But now it's showing all the pages, and I don't want to see all the pages. I only want to see my kind of book notes, right? So how do we do that? Well, conveniently, I decided to put an emoji in those names. So what I can do is say, well, only give me all the pages that have this particular book emoji in the name using this regular expression operator. And there you go. Now we filtered that just for all the book notes, basically, or any note that has, or any page that has a book in the name. Nice, but still not exactly what I want. What I kind of want is to have a bullet list with all the names of my books that I have reviews for, but also some metadata like the author. For that, I first have to kind of annotate those pages. So let me go to Foundation and use another feature here, which is page metadata. So this is just using markdown block syntax, which is standard markdown. It's using the meta language, which is YAML. And here I can now add arbitrary attributes. I can say the author is Asimov. The year of publishing was 1942. The genre is science fiction. Okay, let me just copy that and then also add something similar to Harry Potter. More metadata here. Of course, this is J.K. Rowling. The date was more like, what was it? Let me think. 2007 was one of them, right? Let's say it doesn't really matter. And this is more of a fantasy book, let's say. Okay, so now if we go back to the index page, you'll see that the query updates, and we now have additional fields that are being added here. So author, year, and genre. Okay, nice, but not exactly how I want it to look. So we can actually use a template to render the body of this query. So for that, I'm going to create a page called template/book, but honestly, it could be called anything. Like using template/ is just a convention. And as I said, I kind of want this to appear as a bullet list. I want it to be a bullet list with a link to the name of the book, and then saying by, and then author name, author. And this is using handlebar syntax, right? Like these curly braces there are handlebar syntax, and they inject the names of the attributes of each of the books. So now I go back here. I'm going to add render template/book, and boom. Now it's using that template to render this part of the page. Silverbullet has a markdown preview feature, so it kind of side by side shows you the preview of what the markdown would look like. And in here it looks super clean, right? Like it just has a list of all my books. It doesn't have all this query shenanigans. Although honestly, I don't use a markdown preview all that much. The queries are also kind of marked in gray to kind of fade into the background. So like usually I just like work my way around my spaces with all those queries in there, and they automatically update, and it's a very powerful mechanism. What other stuff can you query? Well, one thing you can do is you can query backlinks. So let's say in this page, I want to list all the other pages that, was it this? Yeah, that link to this particular page. So if you query link, basically you get a list of all the pages that link to this page. In this case, it's only one, it's the index page. That's something you can do. Something more interesting, I would say, is it supports for indexing tasks. So scattered across your space, you can add tasks to different pages. For instance, and that's using this syntax, which is fairly standard, not part of core markdown, but close, let's say. And say like, hey, write some more interesting observations, right? Or in Foundation is like, well, you know, actually watch that adaptation of on Apple TV Plus. What I can also do here is set a deadline and say, okay, actually by tomorrow. It's only 10 episodes, so it should be fine. And as you can tell, like this is kind of interpreted and highlighted in a different way. So like Silverbullet kind of understands what's going on here. Now, so I have now two tasks and two different pages. Let's say that I want to create a new page that lists all my tasks. So I'm going to create a page called My Tasks. And in here, I'm going to write a query that queries all those tasks. Query task. Boom. This has a bunch of stuff. It doesn't look so pretty when looking at this way. This is with the preview. It looks a bit better. And I'm going to say I'm only going to be interested in the name, the page, done, and deadline. Because in one of those, I actually set a deadline, which, as you can tell, has actually been parsed out, and it's now aware that you set a deadline, which also means you can like sort them by deadline, for instance, right? Probably the more likely thing you will want to do here is actually say, well, you know, just show me all the tasks where done is false. So task I have not yet completed, which is still all of them. But let me just go to Harry Potter and complete this particular one by clicking on it. So of course you can just put your X in there, or you can click it, and that will have the same effect. Go to My Tasks, and now you'll see that task is gone from the list. If you want, you can add a kind of an archive section and say, well, you know, these are the tasks where done is true. So these are the things I've already completed. There you go. That's the Harry Potter task. Right. So you can query links, you can query pages, you can query tasks. And of course, you can create custom templates for these as well, right? You probably don't want to render your task list as a markdown table. You create another template that renders it as a task and kind of like operate that way. There's a bunch of stuff you can do. We'll not get into the details of that now. What I do want to show is that you can actually add more sources of things to query. For instance, GitHub. So there's a plug in the repos called Silverbullet GitHub, which I do not have installed right now. So here we get into the point where like, hey, this is how you extend the functionality of Silverbullet. Maybe if you paid attention, you will have noticed there's kind of like a magic special page called plugs. So let's look at what's in there, which again is a markdown file, of course. All of this is kind of like just instruction of what's going on here. The core of it is here. Like this is the list of all the plugins that are currently loaded by default into Silverbullet, but you can add your own. And you can actually remove some of them if you don't like them. In here, there's instructions. Open your plugs node and like add this line to add this functionality. So let's do that. Let me just paste in this extra like GitHub URL, and then following these instructions, run the plugs update command, updating plugins, and done. And now we have a new source we can query called GH events. It's actually documented here. GH events and GH pools. So let me see if I can demo that quickly. So my GitHub activity. Here I can add another query. Is it event or events? I don't remember. Events, okay. Where username equals zfhamel, which is my GitHub handle. And I'm going to just run this, but I'm going to limit the results to, let's say, 5. And this is going to look a little bit messy, but okay. So now it's reaching out to the GitHub API and it's fetching all the events attached to me. Like what is recent activity from me. This is again rendered as a markdown table, which is not super legible, but if you look at it in preview mode, you will actually see some useful things. So, okay, there's repo here, date, and there's also a type, like a type of activity that I have. So what I can do is say, okay, let me just select that, right? The date, the repo, and the type. And then it just renders that, right? Now it's pulling data not only from pages, links, tasks, but also GitHub events. So how do you use this? I use it, for instance, I have a fairly large team. I don't always know exactly what they're working on day to day. I have a note for each of them, I have a page for each of them in my kind of personal space. And part of that is that I also pull some of the recent activity they have on GitHub just to get a sense of what ticket are they working on, what branches are they pushing to, are they commenting on pull requests, all this type of thing. And it's kind of like a nice quick way to pull that data into your knowledge space, if you will. Of course, you can render all this data in the way you want using templates. So there's a lot of customization you can do like that. There's also a bunch of other plugs you can use to add additional sources, additional commands. We're not going to look into that. This is kind of like the high level overview, but it should give you a sense of what Silverbullet is and how you can use it. Honestly, how you can use it is still open for debate and like exploration, because I find new ways of using it every day. That's all for today. Thank you for watching and let me know what you think.